Hello and welcome to another video from Michael's Casual Gaming and Tech channel. This time, we're going to install Guacamole. No, not that guacamole, Apache Guacamole. Apache Guacamole is an open-source, clientless remote desktop gateway. It allows you to remotely access systems from any web browser. I'll be demonstrating an installation on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, although Guacamole may be installed on any Linux distribution. Alright, let's get started. Before we can install Guacamole, we need to first enable two more package repositories. First one is EPEL, or Extra Packages for Enterprise Linux, which is provided by the Fedora project. Since we're using RHEL 8, we need to first enable the code-ready builder for RHEL 8 repository. So we'll just copy this line, then paste it into our terminal. Okay, now code-ready repository is ready for us to use. Now we can install the Fedora EPEL release package. Just paste that line in here. And we've already taken care of this CRB repository message. So just to be sure, we're going to update all our packages. And we are ready to go. The next step is to install Apache Tomcat. This package is included in the default repositories, so we can just install it from the command line like this. Sudo dnf install Tomcat. Now we want to enable the Tomcat service. So we do sudo systemctl enable --now Tomcat. And that now has Tomcat enabled. The next thing that we want to install is the Guacamole server component, or guacd. We want to do sudo dnf install guacd. Now this is not going to include all of the packages that you need for VNC and RDP and sessions like that. So we need to install those packages as well. So to see the list of those, we'll just do a search for them. So the ones that we want to have are libguac client VNC to do VNC sessions. The other sessions that are supported are also listed here. I'm going to do RDP, SSH, and VNC. All right, now we just need to configure Guacamole. First thing that we need to do is create the directories that have not been created yet for Guacamole configuration. So we want to do sudo make dir -p etc guacamole We want to have a bracket, extensions, lib. That way we create the two folders that we need. And there they are. The next thing that we need to create is the guacd configuration file. That will also reside in the Etsy Guacamole folder. Do sudo vim guacd.conf. Do server. Find host equals 127.0.0.1 to be the local host. Find port equals 4822. Save and quit. On to the next configuration file. The next file that we need to create is guacamole.properties. So sudo vim guacamole.properties. We want to enter guacd hostname colon 127.0.0.1 for localhost. Guacd port is the same 4822. We save and quit. Move on to the next step. Now the next thing that we need to do is deploy the web application for Guacamole client. Apache provides this pre-compiled binary for us, so that we don't have to compile it ourselves. So I'm using version 1.5.4 at the time of recording. So I'm going to download this WAR file, and I need to copy it to the Tomcat Web Apps directory. So I want to sudo cp downloads guacamole.war r lib tomcat web apps and call it guacamole.war. If you leave the version number on there, it will put it in the URL and make it not as nice to work with. Now if I go to that folder, we should see it deploy. Helps to say cd. And if I do a list in here, we'll see Guacamole has deployed. Guacamole supports using a database to store the user and connection information. We will use this in lieu of the text file configuration that is also available. This makes it a lot easier to handle the configuration from within the web app instead of having to edit a text file every time we want to add a user or a connection. So to do this, we need to install MySQL first. So we're going to do sudo dnf install at MySQL so that we install the server components. All right, now that that's installed, we need to configure it. I'm going to do MySQL secure installation. We'll enter a password. Oh, forgot to start the service first. We want to do sudo systemctl start MySQL D. And we want to enable it so that it starts on boot every time. So we do sudo systemctl enable MySQL D. Now let's try that command again. Say yes. I'm going to do low because this is just a local installation. We'll go with that password. Remove anonymous users. You don't want to allow root login remotely because that's a security risk. We want to remove the test database and reload the privilege tables. Now our MySQL installation is set up. The next thing that we need to do is create the Guacamole database and Guacamole user in MySQL. I'll leave a link to this article that I'm using in the description. So we want to first log into MySQL. Now we want to create the database, so create database Guacamole DB semicolon. Now we want to create the user. Create user Guacamole user at localhost identified by the password that we're going to use here. I'm going to use their example password for now, semicolon. We want to give this user privileges on the Guacamole database. So we want to do grant, select, insert, update, delete on Guacamole underscore DB dot star to Guacamole user at localhost, semicolon. Now we want to flush privileges. And we're done. The next step we need to do is install the MySQL connector jar file to be used by Guacamole. We'll click on their link that they have here. We're going to go for platform independent. We want to have the tar archive here. We click download. Now this is in our downloads folder. So we want to untar it. And that will leave us with and there's the jar file that we want right there. MySQL connector 830.jar. And we want to put this into the etc guacamole lib folder. We want to sudo copy the jar file to etc guacamole lib. Now to double check that it's in the right place, Etsy Guacamole lib, and there is our jar file. Once we have that, we also need to install the database authentication extension from Apache. Now back on our downloads page, we see a whole bunch of other authentication methods that you can use. And what we're using here is called JDBC. So we want to download this tar file. And we want to put this into Guacamole or Etsy Guacamole extensions. Let's go back to our downloads folder. And untar the Guacamole auth JDBC. Now if we list in here, we'll see that we have MySQL, PostgreSQL, and SQL Server options here. Since we're using MySQL, we want to use the MySQL package. So cd MySQL. And we want to copy this jar file to Etsy Guacamole extensions. Finally, what we want to do for database authentication is import the database schema. To do this, we have this schema folder. We want to enter the schema folder. We want a cat star.sql and pipe it to MySQL Let's make sure I have that command complete, which I do. So we want to do cat star.sql pipe to sudo mysql u root e guacamole underscore db. Now our schema has been imported. The next step is to configure Guacamole to use MySQL as its authentication provider. So to do this, we need to sudo vim etsy guacamole.properties. And we want to add these MySQL properties that are called out here in this walkthrough. I'm going to do I for insert. I'll create a new section here. So we want MySQL hostname 127.0.0.1, MySQL port 3306, MySQL database, Guacamole underscore DB, MySQL username, user, MySQL password is the password that we set earlier. Now, one other thing that you may have to do, and I've had to do this before, is turn off SSL. So if we go to the documentation, it tells us how to do that. We may not need to do this, but I'm going to do this just for demonstration purposes. MySQL SSL mode disabled. This will turn off SSL. If this were exposed to the internet, I would keep SSL enabled, but for the purposes of this example, I'm going to keep it disabled. Okay. Next, we want to open our firewall so that we can reach Guacamole. Sudo firewall cmd permanent -- permanent add port 8080 TCP and sudo firewall cmd reload. I'm not sure if we have to do all these SE Linux contexts, but I'm going to go ahead and do the one for Java. So I'm going to just copy this line. Paste it. And then do sudo se module -X 300 -I my-java.pp. And this will install the SE Linux module to allow Java to work. Okay, now we need to set two SE Linux booleans. So we want to do sudo set se bool -p for persistent domain and mmap _files 1. And sudo set se bool -P tomcat can network connect db 1. Now that we've done that, let's restart the services. Got a sudo in there. Sudo systemctl restart tomcat and guacd. Now we should be able to access Guacamole from the browser. We'll go to 127.0. Whoops. :8080 /guacamole. Oops. Why it says that, but go guac admin and guac admin. I think I spelled that wrong. Guac admin. Now we can configure Apache Guacamole from the web interface. Now we need to add our connections. So we go up here to the top corner, click guac admin, settings, connections, and we want to create a new connection. I'm going to call this rel 8.9-VM because it's a virtual machine that we'll be accessing. We don't need to worry about any of these parameters here, except the host name, which, since this is running on the same machine, I'm going to do localhost The port is 5900 because that's the port of the VNC server. We don't have any authentication required, and we don't need to worry about any of the rest of these options. We scroll all the way to the bottom and click Save. Now if I go up here and click Home, I should have my session, which I do. If I click on it, it should connect. And there we are, remotely connected to our server. So I can log in here. And there we have it, remote access to a virtual machine using Guacamole. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video, coming soon.